The summer Marcus Bennett turned 42, he made a decision that everyone in his life thought was absolutely crazy. He bought an abandoned orphanage. It sat on the edge of town, perched on a hill they called Maple Ridge. The building had been empty for nearly 30 years, ever since the state shut it down in the mid-90s. The windows were boarded up. The paint had peeled away in long, curling strips. Weeds grew tall around the foundation, and the iron fence that surrounded the property leaned at odd angles, rusted and forgotten. But Marcus saw something else when he looked at that old building. He saw a possibility. He saw a project that might finally give his life some meaning again. His friends tried to talk him out of it. His sister Linda called him every other day, asking if he'd lost his mind. His ex-wife Sarah sent him a text that just said, "Really, Marcus? An orphanage?" But Marcus had made up his mind. He'd been working as an accountant for 20 years, sitting in the same office, staring at the same spreadsheets, feeling like his life was slowly draining away. When his father passed away and left him a modest inheritance, Marcus knew exactly what he wanted to do with it. He wanted to create something. He wanted to build something with his own hands. He wanted to feel alive again. So on a warm Monday morning in June, Marcus drove up to the orphanage with the keys in his pocket and a toolbox in his trunk. He parked his car in the overgrown driveway and stood for a long moment just looking at the building. It was bigger than he remembered. 3 stories tall, made of red brick that had faded to a dusty rose color. The roof sagged in places and several of the shutters hung at broken angles, but the bones of the building seemed solid, strong. Marcus took a deep breath and walked up to the front door. The key turned in the lock with a heavy click that echoed in the stillness. The door swung open with a long, low creak. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that fell across the entrance hall. Marcus stepped inside. The air smelled of old wood and plaster, and something else he couldn't quite name. Something that made him think of time itself, of years stacked upon years. His footsteps echoed on the dusty floor. To his left was a large room that might have been a common area. To his right, a staircase climbed up into shadows. He spent that first day just walking through the building, room by room, taking notes on what needed to be fixed. There were so many rooms, small bedrooms with 2 or 3 beds each, the metal frames rusted but still standing, a large kitchen with ancient appliances, a dining hall with long tables and office, a library with empty shelves. As the afternoon light began to fade, Marcus found himself on the 3rd floor, in what must have been the dormitory for the oldest children. The room was long and narrow with windows on both sides. Metal bed frames lined the walls, perhaps 20 of them in total. He stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, and for the first time, he felt the weight of what this place had been. Children had lived here. They'd slept in these beds, looked out these windows, dreamed their dreams in this very room. Marcus found himself wondering about them. Where were they now? What had become of their lives? He shook his head, pushing the melancholy thoughts away. There was work to do. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into the renovation with an energy he hadn't felt in years. He hired a contractor to help with the major structural work, the roof, the plumbing, the electrical systems. But everything else he did himself. He tore out rotted floorboards and replaced them with new wood. He stripped away layers of old wallpaper, revealing the plaster walls beneath. He scrubbed and painted and hammered and sawed from sunrise until well past sunset. His sister Linda came to visit one Saturday and found him covered in paint, replacing a window frame in one of the 2nd-floor bedrooms. "You look happy," she said, and there was surprise in her voice. Marcus paused, brush in hand, and realized she was right. He was happy. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was genuinely, deeply happy. "I am," he said simply. Linda smiled. "Then I guess you're not crazy after all." By the end of August, Marcus had made significant progress. The roof no longer leaked. The windows were repaired and the boards removed, letting light flood through the rooms. The plumbing worked. The electrical system was up to code. He'd decided to convert the building into a community center. There was a need for it in the town, a place where people could gather, where programs could be held, where children could come after school. It felt right somehow to keep the spirit of what the building had been, even as he transformed it into something new. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, near the end of September, when Marcus made his discovery. He was working in the basement, which he'd left until last because it was dark and damp and honestly a little creepy. He was checking the foundation, making sure there were no cracks that needed to be sealed, when he noticed something odd. One section of the wall didn't quite match the others. The mortar was a slightly different color. The bricks were arranged in a subtly different pattern. Marcus ran his hand over the wall, feeling the texture. He pushed gently, then harder. Something shifted. His heart began to beat faster. He went back upstairs and got his tools. When he returned, he carefully began to remove the bricks. Behind them was a small hollow space. And inside that space was a metal box. Marcus pulled it out with trembling hands. The box was old, perhaps 2 feet long and a foot wide, made of some kind of steel or iron. It was locked, but the lock was rusted. It took only a few strikes with a hammer to break it open. Inside were letters, hundreds of them. Marcus carried the box upstairs to the old office where he'd set up a makeshift workspace. He sat down at the desk and carefully began to examine the contents. The letters were old, written in careful handwriting on yellowed paper. As Marcus began to read, he realized what he was looking at. They were letters to the children. Letters from parents, from relatives, from people who cared about the children who'd lived in this orphanage. Letters that had never been delivered. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He picked up another letter, then another. Some were birthday cards. Some were simple notes saying "I love you" or "I'm thinking of you." Some were longer letters, explaining why the writer couldn't visit, promising they would come soon, asking the child to be patient. All of them had been hidden away. None of them had reached the children they were meant for. Marcus sat back in his chair, staring at the box. He felt sick. He felt angry. Most of all, he felt an overwhelming sadness for all those children who'd waited for letters that never came, who'd thought they'd been forgotten when they hadn't been forgotten at all. He spent the rest of the afternoon reading through the letters, sorting them, trying to understand. There were letters dating back to the 1960s, all the way up until the orphanage closed in the mid-1990s. Decades of correspondence, hidden away in a wall. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He couldn't stop thinking about those letters, about the person who'd hidden them. Had it been one of the staff members, someone with authority over the children, someone who'd deliberately kept these connections from happening? The next morning, Marcus called Linda. "I found something," he said. "Something important. Can you come over?" When Linda arrived, Marcus showed her the letters. She sat down and read through several of them, her expression growing more and more troubled. "Marcus," she said finally, "you need to try to get these to the people they were meant for." "I know," Marcus said. "But how? Most of these letters are 30, 40, 50 years old. The children who lived here, they're adults now. They could be anywhere." Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Start with the orphanage records. There must be records somewhere of who lived here, where they went after." It took Marcus 3 weeks to track down the records. They'd been archived at the county office, boxed up and nearly forgotten. But they were there. Names, dates, some forwarding addresses for the children who'd been adopted or placed in foster care. Marcus made copies of everything. Then he began the painstaking work of trying to find the people the letters belonged to. He started with the most recent letters first, figuring those people would be easier to find. He used social media, online directories, old phone books. He called county offices and adoption agencies. He hired a private investigator to help with some of the more difficult cases. It took months. Marcus put the rest of the renovation on hold. Finding these people, getting these letters to them, it became the most important thing in his life. The first person he found was a woman named Catherine Morrison. She'd lived at the orphanage from 1988 to 1992, when she was adopted at age 10. There were 7 letters for her, all from her grandmother, who'd been too ill to care for her but had written every month without fail. Marcus called Catherine and told her what he'd found. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "My grandmother?" Catherine said finally, her voice shaking. "But I thought she didn't want me. They told me she never tried to contact me." "She wrote to you every month," Marcus said gently. "The letters were hidden. They were never delivered." Catherine came to visit the following weekend. Marcus gave her the letters and she sat in the old office and read them with tears streaming down her face. "She loved me," Catherine kept saying. "She really loved me." Before she left, Catherine hugged Marcus so tightly he could barely breathe. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me this." That was the first of many such meetings. Over the following year, Marcus managed to locate nearly 60 of the people the letters belonged to. Each time it was the same: shock, disbelief, then overwhelming emotion as they read the words that had been meant for them so long ago. A man named Robert, who learned that his mother had written to him every week, explaining over and over why she couldn't take care of him, promising that she loved him even though she couldn't be with him. A woman named Grace, who discovered that her older brother had written to her from his foster home, begging the orphanage staff to let them stay in touch. A man named Daniel, who found out that his father had sent money every month for years, money that had apparently been intercepted and never used for his benefit. Each person Marcus found, each letter he delivered, felt like a small piece of justice restored. He couldn't undo what had been done. He couldn't give these people back the childhoods they'd lost. But he could give them this, the truth. The knowledge that they had been loved, that they had been remembered, that someone had cared. Word spread about what Marcus was doing. A local newspaper ran a story. Then a regional news station picked it up. Suddenly people were coming forward. People who'd lived at the orphanage years ago, asking if there might be letters for them too. Marcus went through the box again and again, matching names, making calls, sending emails. The project consumed him completely. His renovation of the orphanage continued, but now it had a different purpose. Marcus decided to create a memorial in one of the rooms, a place where people could come to remember, to honor the children who'd lived here, to acknowledge what had been done to them. On a cool Saturday morning in October, exactly 2 years after Marcus had first bought the building, the Maple Ridge Community Center officially opened. More than 200 people attended the opening ceremony. Many of them were former residents of the orphanage. They walked through the renovated halls remembering. They gathered in the memorial room, where Marcus had displayed photographs and documents from the orphanage's history. They hugged each other and cried and shared stories. Catherine Morrison gave a speech. She talked about what it meant to receive her grandmother's letters after all these years. She talked about forgiveness and healing and the importance of truth. When the ceremony was over, people lingered. They didn't want to leave. This place that had once been a source of pain had become something else. A place of connection. A place of healing. Marcus stood in the entrance hall watching people talk and laugh and embrace. Linda came up beside him and put her hand on his shoulder. "You did something amazing," she said. Marcus shook his head. "I just delivered some letters." "No," Linda said firmly. "You gave people back a piece of themselves. You gave them closure. You gave them peace." Marcus thought about that. About all the people he'd found. All the letters he'd delivered. About the way Catherine's face had looked when she read her grandmother's words. About the way Robert had broken down crying when he learned his mother had loved him after all. About all the moments of reconnection and healing that had come from opening that box. "I bought an orphanage because I was looking for meaning in my life," Marcus said quietly. "I thought I'd find it in the renovation, in creating something new. But the real meaning was in the letters, in helping people find what they'd lost." Linda smiled. "Sometimes we don't know what we're looking for until we find it." As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to leave, Marcus walked through the building one more time. The rooms that had once been filled with dust and shadows were now bright and clean, ready to serve a new purpose. The memorial room held its quiet vigil. The community center would host programs and events bringing people together. But more than that, this place had become a symbol of the fact that the past could be acknowledged, that wrongs could be brought to light, that healing was possible even decades after the harm had been done. Marcus stood in the third-floor dormitory, the last rays of sunlight slanting through the windows. He thought about all the children who'd slept here, all the lives that had passed through these halls. He thought about the letters that had finally reached their destinations, carrying love and truth across the years. He didn't know who had hidden those letters or why. That person was likely long gone, but in a way it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that the truth had come out. What mattered was that people had found healing. Marcus smiled. He'd come to this place searching for a project, for something to fill the emptiness in his life. Instead, he'd found a purpose far greater than anything he could have imagined. As he locked the door that evening and walked to his car, Marcus looked back at the building one last time. The Maple Ridge Community Center stood solid and proud on its hill, no longer abandoned, no longer forgotten. Just like the people who'd once lived here, it had been given a second chance. And in giving the building new life, Marcus had found new life himself. He drove home through the gathering dusk, feeling more at peace than he'd felt in years. The orphanage would stand for generations to come, a testament to the power of truth and the possibility of healing. And somewhere in homes scattered across the country, former orphans held letters in their hands and knew, finally, that they had been loved all along.